Welcome back to my channel, everybody. Thanks again to my subscribers and to people who watch these videos and comment on them. Really appreciated. So today I'm going to do a video just about the Twilight Zone.
Oh, please, let it all be a dream. A very bad, very twisted dream.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Twilight Zone, but not for that long. I'm going to go over my 10 favourite episodes, and I'll talk a little bit about the episodes, and I'm actually going to read the introduction that Rod Serling puts at the beginning of the show, just to give you a little flavour of the tone of the show and how the story starts, hopefully without giving too many spoilers out. I might actually give a few spoilers away when I talk about the episodes, but it's kind of impossible really to not talk about it with any kind of meaning without spoiling a show that's essentially half an hour long. So yeah, 10 favourite Twilight Zone episodes. So the Twilight Zone was a unique show at the time when it came out in 1959. It ran for 5 years, and in those 5 years there were 156 episodes that aired, mostly written and certainly overseen by the inventor of the programme, who was Rod Serling. So Rod Serling had been a multi-award winning writer for TV before that. His big break was a big 90-minute show for TV called Requiem for a Heavyweight, which is about a boxer, which had loads of awards for the acting, as well as I think Jack Palance got an award for it, as well as the awards that Rod Serling got. And he was getting a big name as a writer, and then managed to get CBS to sign on to get him to write The Twilight Zone. And he wrote most of the episodes, and he also had loads of great people working with him. So chiefly, Richard Matheson wrote a lot of stuff for The Twilight Zone, and I've talked loads on my channel about Richard Matheson. The man was an incredible writer. But even Ray Bradbury wrote one of the stories. It was based on one of his own short stories, but he wrote the screenplay as well. So you've had that happening, and Charles Beaumont and George Clayton Johnson also wrote for The Twilight Zone as well. George Clayton Johnson also wrote Logan's Run, if you know that. And there was a whole huge list of actors that went on to become really famous after appearing on The Twilight Zone as well. So, I mean, I'll quickly think of some. So people like Charles Bronson, William Shatner, Lee Marvin, Bill Mumy did loads, Jack Klugman did loads, Burgess Meredith did quite a few as well. Those were the three actors who did more than one. Elizabeth Montgomery, Cloris Leachman was in a couple. There was loads of people. Even Buster Keaton appeared in one as well, and it was kind of written for him in a lot of ways, because it was done like a silent film. It was really clever. Yeah, I mean, also William Tuttle did the makeup on a few of the episodes that are really quite ghastly makeup, and he was famous for some of the things he did on the original Star Trek series as well. So yeah, there was all sorts of reasons why the show worked, but it was hugely influential, and the famous theme has been repeated over and over again, and it's kind of become part of our culture. But also there was loads of films and stories and TV shows that ripped it off as well, or was influenced by it. So, I mean, there's all sorts of reasons why the Twilight Zone has become such a huge part of our cultural heritage. And I discovered it when I was a teenager, when I was about 12 or 13, and it completely blew my mind. And one of the episodes I'm going to mention is the first episode I ever seen. I'll never forget the first time I ever saw the Twilight Zone. And it got me into, I say that, by then I'd already had Star Wars and all that sort of stuff, but I think it got me into a more intelligent look at science fiction and horror at the time when I was really young. So yeah, it had a huge effect on me. So I'm going to go over 10 of my favourite episodes of the original series of The Twilight Zone. So the first episode I'm going to talk about is from the first season, and it's called The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street. It's written by Rod Serling, and what's so fantastic about it is it really shows the way that we socially fall apart when we get threatened, and how fear can be so destructive, and we can, suspicion and distrust can overwhelm us quite quickly. We can turn on our neighbours just through fear. It's just a fantastic example. There's a couple in the series that do that, but this is the best one that does it. So the monsters are due on Maple Street from the first season, written by Rod Serling. I was going to read you the beginning bit. Maple Street, USA, late summer. A tree-lined little road of front porch gliders, barbecues, the laughter of children, and the bell of an ice cream vendor. At the sound of the roar and the flash of light, it will be precisely 6:43 p.m. on Maple Street. This is Maple Street, on a late Saturday afternoon, in the last calm and reflective moment before the monsters came. It's such a great episode. So that's the first one I want to mention. Another one I'm going to mention is The Shelter. Again, this is a really good example. This is why I'm kind of following with it. Another good example of how Rod Serling manages to write something for TV that really delves deep into the way that we can turn against each other once we feel threatened. This time, it's not, in the previous episode, it was aliens that were manipulating us to think that someone else, one of our neighbours, was an alien. And with this one, there's basically a UFO that causes panic in the streets, and there's one shelter, like a nuclear shelter, in the neighbourhood, and one of the families is quite safe. All the neighbours want to go in the shelter, and there's basically a big fight about who deserves to be in the shelter, and people's bigotry comes out, people's idea of who's worth saving and who isn't worth saving, who deserves to be in the shelter, comes out in the script. It's absolutely brilliantly written. So I'll just read it at the beginning of this one. Oh, and this is from this is from the third season. Third season's got some of my favourites in it. There's got lots of my favourites in it. This is again written by Rod Serling. What you're about to watch is a nightmare. It is not meant to be prophetic. It need not happen. It's the fervent and urgent prayer of all men of goodwill that it shall never happen. But in this place, in this moment, it does happen. This is the Twilight Zone. So that's the second one I wanted to mention. I'm leaving the last two. The last two I'm going to mention are my two all-time favourites. So I'm trying to make sure I do those last. The next one I'm going to mention is one from the third season again. It's called The Dummy. And this is another one written by Rod Serling, but it's based on a short story that wasn't actually published by a guy called Lee Polk. I don't know Lee Polk, but he wrote the original story. So this is called The Dummy, and it's a classic ventriloquist dummy plot. I mean, everyone thinks they're a bit creepy, those classic ventriloquist dummies, and this is sort of playing on that idea. There's lots of different versions of this kind of story. I know there's a famous Anthony Hopkins film called Magic, I think it's called, which is about a ventriloquist who goes a bit insane. This is kind of like that. It's really, really well done. And the main ventriloquist is called Cliff. And the ventriloquist is played by Cliff Robertson. And this is the beginning of this one. You're watching a ventriloquist named Jerry Etherson, a voice thrower par excellence. His alter ego, sitting atop his lap, is a brash stick of kindling with the sobriquet Willie. In a moment, Mr. Etherson and his knotty pine partner will be booked in one of the out-of-the-way bistros, that small, dark, intimate place known as the Twilight Zone. And basically, it's that great kind of trope where the dummy becomes a ventriloquist and the ventriloquist becomes the dummy. It's such a good episode. Okay, I'm going to go to the difficult fourth season. The reason why I say difficult fourth season is that some of the episodes in the fourth season don't work because they made a decision to double the length of the episodes for the fourth season. They went back to half an hour in the fifth season, but the fourth season episodes are very long, and some of them are too long. But this one actually benefits from being the length that it is. This episode is called On Thursday We Leave for Home. So this is written by Rod Serling again. And it's a fantastic story where these people are stranded on a planet and they start settling in through necessity. And by the time they get a chance to escape because rescuers are coming and they can take them back to Earth, the kind of self-appointed leader of the group, who's been looking after them ever since they've been stranded, doesn't want them to go, and is trying to persuade them not to go, because this is the first time in his life he's been important. And it's just a really lovely character study about that kind of situation. So they use that sort of plot to really delve into what it means when somebody who's not important suddenly becomes important because of an unusual situation, and what that can mean for everybody else when he's trying to manipulate them to see the world differently. So it's a really good story. I'm going to read the beginning of this one. It's a little bit longer than some of the others. This is William Benteen, who officiates on a disintegrating outpost in space. The people are a remnant society who left the Earth looking for a millennium, a place without war, without jeopardy, and without fear. And what they found was a lonely, barren place whose only industry was survival. And this is what they've done for 3 decades: survive. Until the memory of the Earth they came from has become an indistinct and shadowed recollection of another time and another place. 1 month ago, a signal from Earth announced that a ship would be coming to pick them up and take them home. In just a moment, we'll hear more of that ship, more of that home, and what it takes out of mind and body to reach it. This is the Twilight Zone. So that's an awesome episode. The 5th season episode, called The Masks, is a really good episode. That one's written by Rod Serling again, and this is a really interesting one about basically sometimes he just likes to write a condemnation of horrible character. So basically people who have got really nasty streak in their personalities, or are selfish, or are arrogant, who are spiteful, they get a raw deal in the Twilight Zone, basically, because that clearly was something that used to grind Rod Serling's gears. So that's really what this is about. This is about a family who get the chance to have an inheritance, and they gather in this house to get a will read to them, and basically, as the title suggests, the masks that they get told to wear become really significant in the story. It's really, really clever, quite sort of it's quite a dark story, because nobody in the story is particularly likable, but it's a great episode of the Twilight Zone about comeuppance, really. So I'm just going to read the beginning of this one. Mr. Jason Foster, a tired ancient who on this particular Mardi Gras evening will leave the earth. But before departing, he has some things to do, some services to perform, and some debts to pay, and some justice to mete out. This is New Orleans, Mardi Gras time. It is also the Twilight Zone. It's a really good episode. So that's The Mask. It's one of the last ones to appear, actually, in the show. There's also a fantastic episode called And When the Sky Was Opened. And this is written by Rod Serling, but it's actually based on a story by Richard Matheson called Disappearing Act. Although, clearly Rod Serling liked the idea of the story, but then twisted lots of the actual events and characters in it, because Richard Matheson was said in an interview that his feelings about that particular episode are the same as his feelings about the Omega Man, which is based on I Am Legend. He says they're so different that he doesn't really judge it as an adaptation. But Rod Serling wrote this based on Richard Matheson's story. It's a really lovely story about fear and alienation, and that sort of fear of not mattering, or of not being important, and the idea that you could just disappear, which is essentially what happens to these characters. So it's just a really, really cool and one of those episodes where it's clearly a fantasy thing, because nothing's explained. It just happens, and it just becomes more frightening for the main character. So I'll just read the beginning of this bit. Her name, X-20. Her type, an experimental interceptor. Recent history, a crash landing in the Mojave Desert after a 31-hour flight 900 miles into space. Incidental data, the ship with the men who flew her disappeared from the radar screen for 24 hours. But the shrouds that cover mysteries are not always made out of a tarpaulin, as this man will soon find out on the other side of the hospital door. One of those rare introductions where it doesn't end by saying the words, the Twilight Zone. But yeah, that's another great episode. If you've seen these episodes, then I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't seen these episodes, I would urge you to find them when you can. Right. This is a really good one. Another really famous one as well. It's called It's a Good Life. So this is written by Rod Serling, but it's based on a story by Jerome Bixby called It's a Good Life. And it was this is one of the ones that was remade in the film. I will like to find an opportunity to talk about the film another time. I think the film's really good, and I love the adaptation of this story because it's slightly different, because Joe Dante put loads of stuff in there that were a little bit more cartoony, and sort of delved into the mind of a child a little bit more, and it was a little kind of lighter because of that. Whereas this is really dark, this episode. And it's about a boy who can do anything, and the adults that are around him are basically living in fear because he's got such a vivid and nasty way of doing what he wants, and punishing them if they don't do what he's asked them to do. It's a fantastic story, and this is a long introduction, so bear with me on this one, but it's a fantastic story and a lovely introduction. You may have noticed that some of these introductions are really poetic. So this is the writer in Rod Serling coming out, I think, in the introductions. So here we go. Tonight's story on the Twilight Zone is somewhat unique and calls for a different kind of introduction. This, as you may recognise, is a map of the United States, and there's a little town there called Peaksville. On a given morning not too long ago, the rest of the world disappeared, and Peaksville was left all alone. Its inhabitants were never sure whether the world was destroyed and only Peaksville left untouched, or whether the village had somehow been taken away. They were, on the other hand, sure of one thing: the cause. A monster had arrived in the village. Just by using his mind, he took away the automobiles, the electricity, and the machines because they displeased him. And he moved an entire community back into the Dark Ages, just by using his mind. Now I'd like to introduce you to some of the people in Peaksville, Ohio. This is Mr. Fremont. It's in his farmhouse that the monster resides. And this is Mrs. Fremont. And this is Aunt Amy, who probably had more control over the monster in the beginning than almost anyone. But one day she forgot. She began to sing aloud. Now the monster doesn't like singing, so his mind snapped at her, turned her into the smiling, vacant thing you're looking at now. She sings no more, and you'll note that the people in Peaksville, Ohio, have to smile. They have to think happy thoughts and say happy things, because once displeased, the monster can wish them into a cornfield or change them into a grotesque walking horror. This particular monster can read minds, you see. He knows every thought. He can feel every emotion. Oh yes, I did forget something, didn't I? I forgot to introduce you to the monster. This is the monster. His name is Anthony Fremont. He's 6 years old, with a cute little boy face and blue, guileless eyes. But when those eyes look at you, you better start thinking happy thoughts, because his mind behind them is absolutely in charge. This is the Twilight Zone. And the boy, Anthony Fremont, is played in this episode by Bill Mumy, who has been in a few others as well, and he was Will Robinson in Lost in Space, and he was Lanier in Babylon 5. He's a famous actor just in his own right. But he did play a few different characters in Twilight Zone, and this is one of the sort of classic characters he played in It's a Good Life. Okay, so before I get to the last two, which are my favourites, I'm going to talk about this one, which is a favourite because it was the first one I ever saw. So this really turned me on to the Twilight Zone. It turned me on to so many things because of the Twilight Zone. And this was an episode from the first season called A Nice Place to Visit. This was written by Charles Beaumont, who wrote probably, I don't know, maybe half a dozen episodes of the show, and had a real impact on the show. And it's a fantastic story about a man who dies, and he's visited by an angel who basically gives him this new life. And in this new life, he has everything he could ever want, and nothing ever goes wrong. And because of this, he absolutely loves it at the beginning, and then it starts to get boring. And then basically he discovers he's in hell rather than in heaven. And it's just a fantastic conclusion. It's one of those great kind of twist endings that you realise that happens a lot in the Twilight Zone, but it's got a reputation for that. I'm just going to read you the beginning. Portrait of a man at work. The only work he's ever done. The only work he knows. His name is Henry Francis Valentine, but he calls himself Rocky. because that's the way his life has been. Rocky and perilous, and uphill at a dead run all the way. He's tired now, tired of running or wanting, of waiting for the breaks that come to others but never to him, never to Rocky Valentine. A scared, angry little man. He thinks it's all over now, but he's wrong. For Rocky Valentine, it's just the beginning. So yeah, that is a fantastic episode with a lovely twist ending. So now I'm going to talk about my 2 all-time favourite episodes of the original Twilight Zone series. So this first one I'm going to talk about, of the last 2, is the episode that I named my band after. It's become just a huge kind of point of reference for us. And this episode's called Time Enough at Last. It's written by Rod Serling, based on a short story called Time Enough at Last by someone called Lynn Venable. So Rod Serling decided to adapt this, and he produced an absolutely phenomenal performance from Burgess Meredith. So Burgess Meredith plays Henry Bemis. Henry Bemis is a bookish character who just wants to read all the time, and he works in a bank, and he's supposed to be serving people, but he's reading while he's serving them, and he ends up trapped in the bank vault fortuitously at the same time as a nuclear bomb attack, and basically the whole world is destroyed. He's the last man, and he realizes once he escapes and realizes what position he's in, that he now has a chance to read all the books that he wants, and he's got all the time in the world. And then something happens, the big twist, which I won't spoil in case you get a chance to see it. I'm pretty sure a lot of it's on. Is it on YouTube? It might only be ending that's on YouTube. But yeah, absolutely phenomenal story. And I was going to read you the beginning. Witness Mr. Henry Bemis, a charter member in the Fraternity of Dreamers, a bookish little man whose passion is the printed page, but who was conspired against by a bank president and a wife and a world full of tongue cluckers and the unrelenting hands of a clock. But in just a moment, Mr. Bemis will enter a world without bank presidents or wives or clocks or anything else. He'll have a world all to himself, without anyone. I'm going to I'm going to read the end one as well for this one. The best laid plans of mice and men, and Henry Bemis, the small man in the glasses who wanted nothing but time. Henry Bemis, now just a part of a smashed landscape, just a piece of the rubble, just a fragment of what man has deemed to himself. Mr. Henry Bemis in the Twilight Zone. So brilliant. So that's Time Enough at Last. And now one more, and that's the just insane episode based on a story by Damon Knight, written by Rod Serling, from the 3rd season again, and it's called To Serve Man. To Serve Man is about Earth getting visited by aliens, and they're offering to do all these different things for Earth, for humans, and everyone's very excited about it. They're going to bring about cure for cancer and all sorts of different things, and everyone's like, this is amazing, these aliens are amazing. And all they know is they've got this book that they've managed to translate the title of it, and it's called To Serve Man. And everything they're doing for humans, it just seems like they're here just to serve us and do everything we want, and to basically make us better, make the world better, make the planet better, all these different things. There's a enormous twist at the end that I'm actually going to stop myself from telling you the twist, but I will read the beginning. Respectfully submitted for your perusal, a Canaanite, height a little over 9 feet, weight in the neighbourhood of 350 pounds, origin unknown, motives, therein hangs the tale. For in just a moment we're going to ask you to shake hands figuratively with a Christopher Columbus from another galaxy and another time. This is the Twilight Zone. It features Richard Keel, actually, who then became famous as the kind of henchman Jaws in the James Bond films. So, there we go. That's 10 episodes. My favourite episode is the Twilight Zone. What are your favourite episodes? And what do you think of The Twilight Zone? And are you now curious if you haven't seen it? Thanks a lot. Bye.
Paint me a picture of what it's like to be you. Sit upon your high chair on the outside looking through.